You, of course, cash in during the season, but it's off-season time that you prepare to make the money in college football. We got Steve Merrill on the line from WagerTalk.com to help us break it down, looking at over-unders, national championship game odds, and the Heisman race. Steve, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, doing great, and it's always great to be talking college football with you. And we're only middle of June, only still a couple months away, but I feel like getting closer as we speak. And I definitely started to dig into some of the college betting information that's out there as well.
Not surprisingly, the top 5 teams in the country that have seemed to separated themselves from everybody else are at the top of the board in regards to the wins totals. And for Clemson and Alabama in particular, no margin for error if you select them. You've got to go undefeated. Clemson and Alabama 11.5, Ohio State, Oklahoma at 11 even.
Yeah, I mean, what jumps out to me, first of all, is the much weaker conference that Clemson is in, and that's why they've run that conference. What is it, maybe only one loss now in several years, I think. And, Alabama, I just big picture, first of all, Alabama was a powerhouse last year. It's remarkable what they did with the COVID season to get through it like they did, to play all those games. They also, keep in mind, we're a team playing with a chip on their shoulder after not winning the national title the year before. I don't want to say Alabama is going to be down this year. They still might be the best team in the nation. But from a betting perspective, I think it's going to be very hard for them to be a huge moneymaker. The odds makers have to inflate the lines now. It's going to be hard to get action on the other side. And keep in mind, Alabama lost 6 players in the top 24 NFL draft picks, including 5 offensive players in those top 24 picks. We always saw them as a defensive powerhouse over the years. They've become an offensive powerhouse. So I think there could be a little bit of value fading Bama in certain spots. And being in such a deep and competitive conference, I'd be a little more careful with them. But I really see Clemson kind of being that team with the chip on their shoulder this year, like Bama last year. I don't see much resistance here in the ACC. And, of course, they lose Trevor Lawrence. That's the big headline, the number 1 pick overall. But DJ Uiagalelei, I got to pronounce his name again. I had it good down.
You and everybody else.
I had it good last year. There's a couple games when he was in there, I got it down good. But, it's the off season for me right now. I'm out of shape. And we'll just say DJ, right now he's 3rd over on the Heisman odds. And we saw him play well at Notre Dame. We saw him play well in big games right out of the bat as a true freshman, just like Trevor Lawrence. So Clemson's kind of a play-on team for me for those reasons I just mentioned. Ohio State, kind of neutral right now. I think Bama down a little, Clemson up a little would be the way I kind of look at it big picture right now.
You can hear some NBA players' names roll off of Steve's tongue if you catch him on WagerTalk.com. This is the time of year to catch, of course, the NBA playoff action with Steve and others right there. This is an intriguing play, I think, in that Cincinnati is gaining a ton of respect. Cincinnati's at 10, and considering their schedule, the Bearcats will go on the road at Notre Dame and at Indiana. So 2 heavily thought of Power 5 opponents for Cincinnati outside of what is the best Group of 5 conference.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up when we're talking about the future odds. As far as outright, championship winner, I don't think Cincinnati is going to win the thing. But all you need if you're betting these future odds, in my opinion, Mark, is to get to the Final Four, get to the championship round of 4, because then you can start to hedge out. And I think some of the teams that have a really good shot to do that aren't necessarily the 3 or 4 best teams in the country. We saw Notre Dame a few times in recent years get in, and I don't feel like they were. In fact, they weren't. I mean, they would not have been favored. There was 4 or 5 teams that would have been favored over Notre Dame those years that didn't make the playoffs. Cincinnati, obviously, there's a lot of pressure. The public likes these darlings from the smaller conferences that run the table, and Cincinnati could have some quality wins, as you just mentioned there. So if they do run the table, I don't think they will, but if they do run the table, they're going to have some big-name wins that's going to be very hard to overlook them, especially if a team like Alabama picks up a loss in conference play, and you only have maybe one other undefeated with Clemson would be, in my opinion, if Ohio State picks up a loss in conference play. So I think that's where you want to look here in the future odds, too, or some of these, I don't want to call them mid-majors, because obviously they're not mid-major teams. I mean, they're powerhouses there, but, they're not the Power 5 conferences, I guess would be the best way to say, is where you're going to look for these guys. And I do think, looking down the list here, you've obviously got Alabama, Clemson, the 2 big favorites, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Georgia. I mean, those are the 5 every year. They're all single digits. Everybody else is 25 or 1 or higher. LSU, Texas, they're all. So basically, the odds makers are saying it's a 5-team race for the national championship, and only 4 of those teams can make it. But if you get a team like Cincinnati at 100 to 1 that can sneak in that Final Four, Notre Dame 66 to 1, they've done it a few times, then you look to hedge out, But the bottom line is the cream rises to the top. It's funny, Mark, you mentioned the NBA playoffs. That's the one sport over decades in which there's very few upsets. And this year, with all the craziness, that's not been the case. The Lakers get bumped early. The Jazz have had injuries. The Clippers have had injuries. But normally the cream rises to the top. And it's the same thing with college football. Alabama's won half the national titles over the last 12 years or so. And an SEC team has won over half of them. Going back a couple of decades now, there's been 4 different SEC champs. So Georgia, Alabama in that mix. So big picture, I don't think we're going to see any craziness for the national title. But getting into that 4-team playoff is where you maybe want some long shots. You look at maybe a Cincinnati at 100-1, Texas 25-1, LSU 25-1. By the way, I talked about Alabama maybe coming down a little bit. LSU was that team last year. They win the national title. They get decimated on offense. But don't forget, they upset Florida as a 23-point dog to finish the regular season. They started playing better down the stretch. They got a lot of those young guys back. Interesting to see LSU is right now at some sportsbook the 6th favorite overall, right behind Georgia, to win the national title. So you've got 3 SEC teams in the top 6, Texas A&M and Florida. That means you've got 5 in the top 8, top 9 at some different books from one conference. And, not a surprise. They win every other year, basically.
Yeah, for me, looking at some value back to the over-unders, Stanford is a school that obviously, going back a few years, was one of the top teams in the Pac-12, and coming off a 4-8 season 2 years ago, 4-2 last year, their over-under total is 3.5. Now, it seems inconceivable that David Shaw cannot get them to 4 wins.
Yeah, and plus, a lot of these teams, you obviously, you're not getting quite as much non-conference action. Last year, a lot of these conferences, we had none of it, but now we are getting back to full schedules. It looks like everything is working out okay as far as we record this mid-June, everything with COVID and whatnot is getting better, not worse. But Stanford is a team that doesn't have a real easy non-conference schedule. They don't play any of those cupcakes. I don't see the San Jose State game on there anymore. We used to always have that as the opening game. Last year, actually, Mark, my alma mater, William & Mary, was supposed to play at Stanford. First time they ever traveled to the West Coast in over 100-plus years of football here on the East Coast in Virginia. That game was canceled, of course. This year, though, Stanford out of the gate, a neutral field against Kansas State, and then at USC right after that. And then they're at Vanderbilt, an SEC opponent. And then it's all conference teams after that till they close with Notre Dame. So, I'm telling you, you look at this schedule, I don't necessarily see a game right now in which they might be favored. Because at Vanderbilt, they'll probably be a dog. And they're at Washington State. They get Washington at home. Their home games are tough. Maybe against Cal, the second to last game of the season. So when you start looking at a big picture like that, they need to win 4 games, and they might not be favored in more than 1. So, yeah, it's going to be a very tough season. But, now from a point spread perspective, that doesn't mean you can't make money with them, because they're going to be a good-sized dog. I think they're going to be competitive. But, yeah, they don't have that cupcake non-conference schedule like they've had in years past, to say the least.
Yeah, on the flip side, UCLA gaining a lot of respect in Vegas. They're number 7 even for a team that won 7 combined games in 2 seasons under Chip Kelly to start his tenure, 3-9 and 4-8. They went 3-4 in a truncated season last year, but 7 wins. To think that UCLA is going to have to win 8 games for a better to lose the over or the underplay on UCLA at 7 is just inconceivable to me.
Yeah, by the way, Stanford went 4-8 2 years ago. They went 4-2 last year. So it's a team that won 4 out of 6 games, and now they only have to do it on a 12-game schedule. But once again, we talked about that schedule. Yeah, UCLA, they don't have a real easy non-conference. They do start with Hawaii at home, then they get a really tough game against LSU, who I just mentioned earlier. I think it's going to be a sleeper this year. Then they get Fresno State at home. So they do get 3 straight home games, but then they're on the road for 3 of their next 4 after that with conference play starting. So I think they're going to be pretty beat up by the time the season's over. Yeah, this is a team that went 3-4 last year, 4-8, 3-9, and then 6-7 4 years ago. Chip Kelly's 4th year. We do often see coaches, by the way, 3rd year is usually the magic number for me. Last year is kind of a half year. So this is really kind of, in my opinion, Chip Kelly's 3rd year, even though it's his 4th overall. But you're banking on him to do a lot here. And I kind of want to see the proof first before I put money on it.
Got Steve Merrill on the line from Wager Talk. You can catch him right there. You see the banner, wagertalk.com. And also keep in mind that Steve joins us on a regular basis, a weekly basis, once we crank up the college football season in September. The Heisman Trophy, the most prestigious of the awards across college football. And with the player movement, obviously, in the sport, it's not like the NFL where You're going to see Aaron Rodgers in the MVP race 10 consecutive years. So you've got a lot of players that sneak into the Heisman race from an odds perspective that haven't even really played because of the position they play and because of their highly touted status, like a Bryce Young at Alabama, like an Ohio State quarterback, whoever wins that job, most likely CJ Stroud. So even DJ Uiagalelei will factor into the Heisman odds despite just playing a few games. So, how do you approach those odds in looking for a good play?
Yeah, one thing about sports betting is that something that works, or the odds makers don't sleep for long when they get burnt. And I don't even know if they necessarily got burnt over the years, because when the odds are big, it's because there's no money on them. When you get 100-1, that's because there's very little bets coming in, or big bets at least. But one thing that was working like clockwork for about a decade was long shots with the Heisman. This was one sport, kind of like the Kentucky Derby for many years. You never wanted to play the favorite. This was the Kentucky Derby of sports betting for college football, in my opinion. The reason being, as you've mentioned, Mark, young guys. We get 3-year-olds running in the Kentucky Derby, got a lot of freshmen and sophomores. Cam Newton's a guy, from my recollection, was the first one to do it. This is a guy who never played a single college football game at the Division 1A level. He comes out and wins a national title. He was not even on the board, obviously, in a lot of sports books. If you were to find him, he would have been several 100-1 that year. RG3. That was the year Andrew Luck was the favorite. And in November, you could still get RG3 at over 100-1 at some sports books. Back in November, with only a couple weeks left, Andrew Luck was like 1-10. And RG3, Robert Griffith III, ended up winning it that year at 100-1 late in the season. So my point is, you don't want to play these short prices and tie your money up for the next 5 or 6 months, because historically speaking, that's not the way to go. You look at last year, an Alabama teammate is higher on the Heisman at the same position on the preseason odds, and another guy wins it. So
3 in the top 5.
Right, exactly. And so, historically speaking, and you mentioned Bryce Young, and that's the one I wanted to bring up. This is a guy, had that been Cam Newton, would have been 100-1. And now he's the second overall favorite in a lot of sports books. I'm seeing as low as 7-1. Spencer Rattler, by the way, is 5-1 favorite from Oklahoma from a lot of the books I'm looking at. Clemson, DJ, he's third overall at 7-1. That would be the guy I'd go with right now, because once again, I'm kind of big on Clemson. I think they have a very easy conference schedule. I think he can put up big numbers, and we've seen what he can do. He had a couple games, one at Notre Dame, and he played very well. Should be even better this year. But you really want to dig deeper, and we've seen that year after year. The top 2 or 3 guys hardly ever win the Heisman. So what are your thoughts, Mark? Who's somebody you're looking at could be a possible sleeper here? Obviously, the Bama guys make a lot of sense. Like last year, we see a position player once again win it. We don't see Bama quarterbacks win it. Yet you have to go all the way down, basically, to Brian Robinson Jr., 40-1. I'm looking here. I've got Mechie III at 50-1. It's hard ever for a defensive guy to win, obviously, just because statistics kind of dominate and you get them more on the offensive side. But, yeah, I think, you're going to up to DeAndre King, Miami quarterback, only 16-1. I would have liked more value there, but I do think that's the one team in the ACC that I don't know if they give Clemson a run, but could make a lot of noise because they have that offensive firepower. But then again, he's been hurt, so you never know about his health. A lot of question marks. Really no surprises on this list, though. I think Robinson for Texas, 20-1. I think Texas could surprise a little bit this year. But you do normally want to look for a semi-long shot when playing the Heisman.
So, yeah, if you're looking at long shots and you bring up that Alabama trio, which the quarterback is not the long shot, but the other two in Mechie
Right.
and Robinson, I think Robinson's going to split too many carries. He's not the dominant back in the backfield, where Mechie, they have been depleted at wide receiver, not from a talent perspective. Of course, they just come at you in waves with 5 stars, but in regards to experience coming back, and Mechie caught 55 passes last year, I think he could be the go-to guy that just has those ridiculous numbers like Devontae Smith did last year. Maybe he's a value play for Alabama. And you mentioned Bijan Robinson at Texas. He ran for over 8 yards per carry in a short season last year, and he's going to be the guy. And Texas has a new starting quarterback, going to be relying on the run. He's going to gain a lot of carries out of that backfield.
Yeah, and one thing I'll point out, also we talk about the MVP odds in the Super Bowl. When you and I do our Super Bowl show every year, we talk about how, quarterbacks win over half the MVP awards, and it's very well correlated to the team that wins. Well, it's the same thing with the Heisman. Everyone remembers, Devontae Smith wins last year. And of course, what I was referencing earlier is that Waddle was ahead of him in the Heisman preseason odds. Not only was Smith like third on his, I know he was at least third because he was behind, Waddle and McCarron. But I'm not so sure there wasn't maybe another Bama guy. I'd have to look that was ahead of him. So he was only third on his own team in the Heisman odds, and he wins it. Second in his own position on his own team and wins it. Just incredible. And that's why these long shots do hit. But before that, 4 straight quarterbacks. You go back to 2015, Derrick Henry won as a running back. And then before that, 5 straight quarterbacks. And we go back to 2009, Mark Ingram wins it as a running back. And then before that, 3 more quarterbacks, Reggie Bush then. So, I mean, it's been basically, other than, Smith last year, it's been 3 running backs and like 9 or 10 quarterbacks. So you kind of have to look that way. And with the era of football being so pass heavy, and offensively explosive, it is pretty hard to make a case for anybody other than a quarterback or a receiver. And, once again, these odds are sharp and these guys are favored for a reason. It'd be hard for me to disagree. But historically speaking, it's usually a dark horse. Down the stretch they come. It's like the Kentucky Derby, and it's somebody that wasn't necessarily on our radar at this time of year.
I don't have the list in front of me. Do you see C.J. Stroud, the Ohio State quarterback, on that list? He's going to put up big number. Whoever wins the job, it's a 3-man battle, and he's expected to win the job. They've got the best wide receivers in the country this year. They should put up huge numbers.
Well, he's 4th overall with J.T. Daniels, the Georgia player. So, I mean,
okay.
And that's exactly the reason I didn't mention him is exactly what you said, Mark. I mean, this guy's 4th overall to win the Heisman, and it's not 100% he's going to be the starting quarterback for his team. I mean,
he's never thrown a pass at the collegiate level.
Or Bryce Young for Alabama, 2nd overall. I mean, it's, and then you've got Spencer Rattler and DJ on each side of them, and you've got very little experience with Clemson, but we've seen what he could do. But yeah, that's what's so crazy about this. I mean, that's what the odds makers are telling you. Like, Stroud's the guy. We've seen what these other Ohio State quarterbacks have done every year. I mean, their numbers are insane. But he has to be that guy. And then, of course, you always run the risk of them maybe putting other guys in a little bit more and blowouts and stuff, and him not padding his stats as much as some of these guys that don't have the backup talent. So, yeah, very interesting guy to talk about because he's at 12-1, 4th overall, assuming he's even the starting quarterback, as you said.
Good stuff with Steve Merrill, Wager Talk. Catch him and the rest of the staff there. You can also catch Steve at his site, prosportsinfo.com. Steve, always appreciate you stopping by. It's been a while. We will catch up with you soon as we head, I'm sure, once college football media days are only about a month away, and then it just rolls right into August camp, and before you know it, they're on the field. So we will track you down at some point soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark.